Hey, what's going on everyone? Fulton here yet again with my second to last top list video for the year of 2012. Tonight I'm going to be counting down my top 15 progressive rock albums of the year, and I knew I had to do this list since I am a progressive rock fan at heart. This might not be a list for everyone, and a list that might split a little bit of hairs later on in the list, considering some things might appear to be more metal or more straight up rock sounding than others, but the majority of the albums found on this list are mainly rooted in progressive music, whether it be rock or metal, which is why they are on this list. So either way, this is definitely a really great list and something that took a little bit of time to get together, but I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out and I hope you enjoy it. So let's get down to it. My top 15 albums of the progressive rock variety from 2012. And coming in at number 15, we have Astra with the Black Chord. Now, they are a progressive rock band from the San Diego, California area, and this album actually happens to be my first ever experience in hearing the band, but this is some of the most genuine sounding 70s progressive rock revival I've heard in a long time. Beardfish actually being one of the first bands to come out that I really enjoyed doing this kind of style, but this, even after the existence of Beardfish over the last decade or so, this is definitely a fresh new take on the 70s progressive rock style. Very spacey sort of progressive rock with great use of synth and guitar, very much inspired by early Camel, early Gentle Giant, with even sort of a Robin Trower kind of flavor in the guitar. This band is definitely not afraid to go lengthy with their songs and have nice spacey keyboard solos or guitar solos or even just long instrumental passages. Just great overall sound with a lot of that old school fuzzy sort of muffled sound, really old school progressive rock sound, and they definitely did that well. This sounds like it could be straight out of the 70s, and very, very well done, and a very promising new band here with this new album. So, Astra with the Black Chord, number 15. And coming in at number 14, we have Swedish progressive rock giants, the Flower Kings with Banks of Eden. Now, if you happen to be a modern progressive rock fan, the Flower Kings should not be a new name to you, and the Flower Kings just continue to make the 70s progressive rock epic just oh so fashionable again, and still that early Yes flavor in their songwriting, their orchestration, and their instrumentation, and even in the vocals occasionally. Just a very ambitious album, just like all of the previous Flower Kings albums. This is a double CD set with a 25-minute opener. I mean, how ambitious can you get with that? It's just fantastic production as always, great playing and songwriting, and just great musicianship from everyone in this band, and definitely one of the Flower Kings' best. I won't go out and say that it is the best Flower Kings album to date, but definitely one to check out if you are a fan of the band. There's no excuse to not like it if you are already a fan of them, and definitely something for any just fan of progressive rock to check out. So, number 14, the Flower Kings with Banks of Eden. And at number 13, Genesis and Yes unite with a little collaboration called Squack It. And the album is called A Life Within a Day, and this is a collaboration between Steve Hackett of Genesis, the ex-guitarist of Genesis, as well as Chris Squire of Yes, with Chris being the only consistent member throughout the entirety of the career of Yes. But this is a very unique blend for both of these musicians. Probably not as ambitious as you might expect, but still a very phenomenal album. Just a good variety of songs here with more of a accessible, almost poppy element, but still extremely, extremely progressive. These solos from Steve Hackett on this are just brilliant and really great sound to them too. Really great production on this. The bass tones from Chris Squire, just that punchiness that you know and love if you were a fan of Yes, and just a really cool combination. I mean, as I said, it's not as ambitious as you might expect, but that accessibility is probably one of the best things about it. It's a really good batch of songs, and definitely something to check out if you were a longtime fan of either band. And definitely one of the coolest collaborations to come out all year. So number 13, Squack It with A Life Within a Day. And moving on to number 12, we have New York-based contemporary progressive rock band Coheed Cambria with the Afterman Ascension. Now this is Coheed Cambria still continuing on with their Amory Wars saga, this time focusing on the storyline of Sirius, or Cyrus. And it is the first of 2 albums, as a lot of you may know. This also shows the return of Josh Eppard, the band's original drummer, you can call it, or at least the drummer that played on the first 3 Coheed Cambria albums, my personal favorite Coheed Cambria drummer. And it's the return of the more progressive rock-oriented Coheed Cambria sound. And it's definitely not the best Coheed Cambria album, but definitely a really solid piece of work here. Definitely a little bit short, as I said in my review of this earlier this year, but still a great record though. A little bit anticlimactic towards the end, but still a really solid effort. The return of the great production is on this album, which was definitely a step back in the right direction for the band, and I can't wait to see what Part 2 has in store for us. And I believe that comes out in February of 2013, so definitely look out for that. And I knew it had to make it onto this list. So in number 12, we have Coheed Cambria with the Afterman Ascension. And coming in at number 11 is the infamous multi-instrumentalist from the Netherlands, Arjen Anthony Lucassen, with his new solo album, Lost in the New Real. Now, those may know Anthony from his voluminous work with the progressive rock opera project Arion, which was basically his baby over the last, 15 years or so. And this is his new solo album, but just a terrific variety. And as you can possibly imagine, it's really lengthy, this one being a double album. And it's just a really, really great mix of sounds and just a brilliant use of narrations to convey the storyline happening on this album, and just really fantastic use of humor with some of the song titles and some of the musical ideas being throwbacks to early progressive rock, and the motifs and throwbacks are just really, really kind of cool and a little bit humorous for old school fans of progressive rock, with throwbacks to the Beatles and early Pink Floyd. This is definitely an album for fans of Arjen already. Fans of Arion should definitely love this as well. It's nothing too new brought to the table here, but just a really, really epic batch of tunes and really cool storyline as well. So definitely one to check out if you're a fan of any of that. So number 11, Arjen Anthony Lucassen with Lost in the New Real. And coming in at number 10, we have the London-based Genesis Axeman yet again, Steve Hackett with Genesis Revisited Volume 2. Now this might not exactly be an album full of new material by any means, but a double album full of revisions and reworked versions of Genesis songs from the Steve Hackett era. Now, the musicians that he got to guest on some of these tracks are just absolutely incredible. Some of these musicians including Michael Agerfeld from Opeth, as well as Steven Wilson of Porcupine Tree. Now, this might be a perfect beginner's introduction to the old school side of Genesis. The production is just out of this world, but he really brought new life to some of these old tunes. Not that they were bad to begin with, but just hearing some of these reworked versions with some of these guest vocalists and guest guitar players is just absolutely phenomenal. If you're a fan of sort of a modern era of progressive rock like Opeth or Porcupine Tree, and you kind of want to get into some of the early Genesis material, well, this might be the perfect thing for you. Steve Hackett with Genesis Revisited Volume 2, number 10. And coming in at number 9, we have the Scottish and perceived one-legged flute player, Ian Anderson, with Thick as a Brick, Part 2, Whatever Happened to Gerald Bostock. Now, to those who don't know, Ian Anderson is the frontman and infamous flute player of the band Jethro Tull, and even though he is alone on this new album, it doesn't really matter because it just sounds like the old school Jethro Tull sound is back. Now, this lyrically and conceptually is the modern life in modern times of the young boy featured in the very first Thick as a Brick track, Gerald Bostock, and just has some really cool lyrical and musical throwbacks to the first album. And it's definitely not as good as the first album, but I really don't think it was kind of intended to be. And it's good to know that Ian Anderson still has his, really dry and tongue-in-cheek sense of humor, but it just still sounds like the Jethro Tull sound is back from the 70s, and really, really cool to hear. Steven Wilson laying down a really nice mix for this, as well as remixing and re-releasing the very first Jethro Tull Thick as a Brick album, and they were released sort of few months apart from each other, but definitely something to check out if you are a fan of Jethro Tull and Thick as a Brick, either one of these, if not both. And definitely a really cool extension to this story. Definitely one to check out, and definitely worthy of making it onto this top list. Number 9, Ian Anderson, Thick as a Brick, Part 2, Whatever Happened to Gerald Bostock. And coming in at number 8 from Norway, we have progressive metalers Circus Maximus with 9. Now, this is one of those examples of a band that might split a little bit of hairs. Some people might think that they're better suited for a metal list, some on this progressive rock list, but either way, I definitely consider progressive metal being their strong point in their forte. But either way, on this new LP from Circus Maximus, we have more of a straightforward, more stripped down, catchy, more melodic sound for the band, and more of a pop element as well. And even though there is this vast difference in comparison to their first 2 albums, this is quite possibly one of their best albums, if not their best album to date. And just a batch of really great songs, really great melodic solos, and just really good production. And this is one of those examples where it's the case that less is more, but there's still a ton going on in these songs. That's actually probably not a really good example, but either way, I knew I had to include it on this list. Definitely worthy of being on here. Number 8, Circus Maximus with 9. Moving on to number 7, we have yet another progressive rock multi-instrumentalist, this one from California, Neal Morse with Momentum. Now, a lot of you might recognize Neal Morse from his early work with the progressive rock band Spock's Beard, but as of recent years has released a plethora of solo albums. And this new album is pretty much business as usual for Neal. The lyrics still kind of contain that Christian sort of religious element, and if you don't happen to be a fan of that kind of stuff, the music is still absolutely phenomenal. Neal once again joined by his longtime friends Paul Gilbert on guitar and Mike Portnoy on drums. I mean, really, can you go wrong with that combination? I don't think so. This album once again containing that 30-plus minute Neal Morse epic. This one is actually the closing track. And really, what's not to love? I mean, Neal just always puts out so much new material from each new record, and it's just amazing that he's able to pump out so much. This new album now has a little bit more of a rock-oriented sound in comparison to the last couple of albums that have had more of a progressive metal element, just in sort of the sound of the guitars, not exactly with the vocals, but overall, absolutely phenomenal album. If you're a fan of Neal, you should eat this up. Really not much of a difference here, but still, business as usual for Neal Morse. Definitely check this out if you're a fan. Number 7, Neal Morse with Momentum. And coming in at number 6, we have contemporary progressive rockers from El Paso, Texas, the Mars Volta with Knock Tourniquet. Now, this is the 6th full-length record for the band and the follow-up to 2009's Octahedron. This is easily one of the band's most experimental albums, with heavy use of electronic sounds on this album. But I think the biggest center point of this album is Cedric's vocals. The vocals on this album are placed in a way that you would just never expect. Cedric, I guess, spent a good deal of time working on the vocal tracks for this album, and if you can listen to the background tracks and the background music happening, you'd never think that he would be able to fit the vocals the way that he does on some of these tracks, but he makes it work, and he makes it work so well. Not the strongest Mars Volta album, but definitely a lot to love on this. This is an album that you're going to have to listen to a couple of times for its true colors to really kind of bloom, but either way, the Mars Volta are still one of the most original sounding bands that come out in recent decades, and they're still managing to sound original and new even in 2012, so big props to them. Number 6, the Mars Volta with Knock Tourniquet. And finally, making it into the top 5 from Toronto, Canada, progressive rockers Pyramid Theorem with their self-titled album. And as I said in my recent review of this, they're just one of the best new progressive rock bands to come out in a very, very long time. A perfect blend of the music of Rush and Dream Theater, just molded in a way that just sounds original. It doesn't sound hokey, it just sounds so honest and just so genuine. They're just such a young band, but they're just so talented at the same time. Very honest record, just terrific songwriting, and just great musicianship. This is a band that's definitely going to go very, very far, and at least I hope that they do. and I want to make sure that they do. So definitely check this band out. Certainly a band to check out here if you're a fan of progressive rock or progressive metal. Pyramid Theorem with their self-titled album, number 5. And coming in at number 4, we have another progressive rock supergroup of sorts. This one, Flying Colors with Flying Colors. And this is, of course, one of the new Mike Portnoy projects since his departure from Dream Theater. And he is also working with Neal Morse, Casey McPherson, Steve Morse, and Dave LaRue. Now, these are some big names in the progressive rock world, but them coming together, this is an album full of more straightforward, classic rock-oriented tunes with an occasional more poppy, more alternative sound. And every single song seems to tell a separate story of its own, and each song seems to have a different style of its own. Great variety of tunes on this, and this band definitely knew where to utilize its technicality as well as its simplicity at the times where it really needed to. This is a band that sounds like they've been together for way longer than they really have. I mean, this was a band that was only formed for a couple of weeks before they went into the studio to record this, and this just has instant classic status written all over it, and it really just sounds like they've been around for years. Just a great chemistry and just phenomenal songwriting, and just everything about this album is just magic, and I was so glad this was able to happen, and I can't wait to hear if they do another one of these. Definitely looking forward to that if they do decide to write another one. So definitely want to check out here in 2012 if you're a fan of progressive rock. Flying Colors with their self-titled album Flying Colors at number 4. And coming in at number 3, we have from Liverpool, Anathema with Weather Systems. Now, this was the follow-up to 2010's We're Here Because We're Here, which was already a phenomenal album, but this one is even better. This is one of the most beautiful albums I've ever heard in my entire life. And not only is the songwriting and the flow of this album just incredible, but the production and the mix are just perfect. This is one of the strongest, if not the strongest, album in Anathema's discography as far as I'm concerned, and one of the most emotional albums you'll ever hear in your entire life. If you're a fan of just emotional musical landscapes with brilliant vocals, brilliant acoustic guitar, this is the perfect album for you. Just brilliant mix of female and male vocals, heart-wrenching lyrics with just brilliant vocal execution, and just terrific flow and musicianship, the acoustic guitar and the piano, and just the overall ambient landscape that this album has is just absolutely stellar, and one of the most breathtaking musical experiences I have experienced all year. At number 3, Anathema with Weather Systems. Definitely check this one out. And coming in at the number 2 spot, we have yet another progressive rock supergroup. This time, Swedish progressive rock and English progressive rock are coming together with Storm Corrosion. Now, this was the long-awaited collaboration between Michael Akerfeld of Opeth and Steven Wilson of Porcupine Tree, and man, oh man, was it worth the wait. Because this was nothing like what you'd expect from these two gentlemen, and although it does at times have similarities to Steven Wilson's more recent solo album, Grace for Drowning, and even elements of the more recent Opeth album, Heritage, at times it kind of doesn't, and it's kind of interesting the way that came together, because this is an album that is brooding, it is haunting, it is nightmarish at others, but at the same time it's beautiful and dreamlike. This is only 5 tracks in length and might clock in under 40 minutes or so, but man, this is a musical journey that packs a punch. This is something that's not going to grab you right away, and an album that's definitely going to take many, many listens for its true colors to finally show, but I will honestly tell you, this is an album that gets better with time, and something that's sort of timeless, and something that's going to age like a fine wine. I'm not saying it's going to be an instant classic, but it's definitely something that gets even better with each and every listen. This is something that's really hard for me to take out of my CD player, but definitely deserving of the number 2 spot on this top list. Storm Corrosion with Storm Corrosion, number 2. And coming in at number 1, this should absolutely come as no surprise to any of you out there. At number 1, Rush with Clockwork Angels. I mean, do I really have to say it again? I mean, just watch my review of it that I just recently made, and it's just incredibly obvious that this band will just never ever age, and they are playing with such a young energy on this album, and it is just so incredible to hear. With this being their 19th studio album, it's just incredibly obvious that they are not going to give up the torch that they so proudly hold. And it just continues to be the case that they are one of the best, if not the best, band in the progressive rock genre. And they're just timeless wonders. Their songwriting and their playing will just never decay, and this is easily the best, if not one of the best, albums they've put out since Moving Pictures. I'm just absolutely stunned. I mean, I still listen to this at least 5 times a week, so that's a sign of a timeless album right there. This is instant classic for all Rush fans, and it seems to be unanimous that at least they agree that this is a phenomenal album, if not one of the best albums they've ever put out. I can't get enough of it. The storyline is just incredible, and the production is fantastic, and just the songs are just very well done. This was very much time well spent on this album. We've been working I think over 3 years on this album, and it really shows. Just very, very intricate and very well crafted. And if this is the last Rush album, it's okay, because this is the biggest bang they could possibly go out on. And gotta say, I love my little Canadian trio. I still do. And this is a prime example of why I still love them. So, coming in at number 1 on my list of 15 progressive rock albums of the year, Rush, Clockwork Angels, and it's very deserving of the number 1 spot. And that's going to do it for my top list of 15 progressive rock albums of 2012. Please check out some of these albums if you haven't heard of them already, and please stay tuned for my last and final top list video, my top 25 metal albums of 2012. I'm sure a lot of you have been looking forward to that. But till next time, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Thank you.